Hey everybody, Storytime. This is a story that some of my friends have enjoyed. Maybe you'll find it amusing too. I'm an ex-radio pirate. Yeah, I ran an unlicensed pirate radio station. Actually, a couple of them. I had a pirate AM station, followed by a pirate FM station, followed by getting busted by the Federal Communications Commission. So I'll tell you how all this went down. But before I do, quick note to all of you law enforcement types out there. Please keep in mind, I was just a kid. I was just a young teenager, and the statute of limitations have long passed on this, and no horses were hurt in the production. So don't sue me, bro. I grew up in a household that was very technology driven. My dad was an engineer. My dad was really into radio. He was a ham radio operator. He worked also with commercial radio, and we knew some other engineers from significant commercial radio stations. And so technology was pretty commonplace when I was growing up. And we would go to ham swap meets, and I would talk to various people and encounter different pieces of equipment. And at some point, I had acquired an AM transmitter, a low-powered AM transmitter. This was a transmitter called an LP6. It was made by Low Power Broadcast Corporation, LPB. And it was a small box that was tube type. It was manufactured in the late 1960s. And it was a AM broadcast transmitter. But being an LP6, I think that means it had 6 watts of power. It wasn't high powered. It was just a few watts. But don't be fooled by just a few watts. It only takes a few watts to broadcast a pretty good signal. Consider that a CB radio, now I understand that's an entirely different band, but a CB radio is 4 watts. And you can broadcast for miles with a CB. Police car radio is probably 25 or 50 watts, and they can go all over the county. So just a few watts of power can get things happening. Now, of course, a commercial broadcast station is running 1,000 or 5,000 or 50,000 watts, and that gives them tremendous coverage. And they also have good antennas. So I wasn't anywhere near in that league. But I get this LP6 transmitter, and I thought, that's curious. I wonder how far that could send a signal. Now, the LP6, I think its intended purpose was to do local coverage of a campus. So, for example, a school or a hospital, you could run a long wire around the facility, which would probably be a lousy antenna, but you could drive a signal into that and have your local informational broadcast that would cover your facility and maybe a neighbor or two next to you. But if you put that energy into a proper antenna, well, it might broadcast for a little ways. So I was curious what I could do with it. So I grabbed a spool of wire, which was a 1,000-foot spool of 18-gauge copper, non-stranded wire, enamel-coated. I imagine that spool of wire today would be expensive. And I grabbed this wire and climbed up into the farthest tree on the property and tacked it up about 15 feet in the air and spooled it across the property. And I'm sure I calculated the correct antenna length for the frequency that I was operating on, and I scanned around the band to find a nice, open, clear spot where I wasn't going to interfere with anybody. And with AM, those antenna lengths are very long. The wavelengths are very long, so we're talking hundreds of feet. And so I think I spooled out 600-some feet of wire, which, of course, was a properly tuned AM antenna. I'm sure my VSWR was horrible. And I energized that thing. Now, this antenna, of course, was a horizontal wire, and so it was horizontally polarized, which is less than ideal for AM. But, hey, I'm just a young teenager. I'm not going to put up a tower. Work with what I got. So I put a signal into this long piece of wire I strung across the trees in the property, and then hopped in the car or had somebody drive the car, is I drove around town to see how far I could broadcast that signal. It wasn't bad. It was kind of spotty. There were some areas where it seemed like I got half or 3/4 of a mile away and it was getting pretty staticky, but there were other areas where I would get several miles out and still have signal. And I was able to cover half or 3/4 of our small town with just that little 6-watt transmitter. Pretty cool. Now, I never had any big inclinations or desires to be a cool radio DJ or anything like that. I just came across this transmitter and thought, that's curious, let's see what it can do. Strung up a wire. Told my friends about it, and they thought that was pretty cool. It's like, you got a radio station, dude? Awesome. I'm like, yeah, it works pretty well. And they said, that's really cool. You should play some good music on it. And I'm like, maybe so. And they're going, man, radio around here, it's awful. They're playing disco and Casey and the Sunshine Band. We need a station that plays some good music and doesn't play commercials. Good idea. And that was something that we could do. So we started spinning up good music, according to us, which consisted mostly of Rush and Led Zeppelin, maybe a little Foghat, occasional Pink Floyd, a lot of Ted Nugent, Jimi Hendrix. And we would do things like play entire albums from Rush, because it's Rush, of course. And of course, there were no commercials. And so we thought that was pretty cool. I didn't do a whole lot of getting on the air and being a DJ. We mostly just played the music that we like. And I think that station probably had 7 listeners. The coverage was pretty spotty, but it did cover a good portion of the town. So after school, I would come home and kick on the transmitter and start playing some good music, according to us. A couple of my friends enjoyed getting on there, doing the DJ thing. It was cool. But being a budding audio engineer, I wasn't very happy with the whole AM situation. The coverage was spotty. AM has its limitations of being noisy and staticky, and it wasn't stereo. And so we did this for a while, I don't know, a few months or so. And I started having the desire, thinking, it'd be a lot better if we could broadcast an FM rather than this AM. And that long wire antenna was just a contraption, and it didn't work very well. Whereas FM is much more manageable. And so over time, I had come across an FM exciter, a commercial FM exciter. And an FM exciter is the beginning part of a commercial FM transmitter. The exciter takes in your audio and it creates the FM broadcast signal. The whole signal, it properly modulates the FM signal. It has the subcarriers for stereo and all of that jazz. And so it is a small FM transmitter on its own. Now, in a commercial broadcast facility, the output from the exciter would then go into one or more linear amplifier stages to boost that low power from the exciter, which is 10 watts, 15, 20 watts, and it would boost it up to 100 watts, 1,000 watts, 5,000 watts, 50,000 watts of full FM station power. But the exciter was the beginning of the process, and it was what actually created the FM signal, and it had a modest amount of output. I think it was 10 or 15 watts. And an FM antenna is much more manageable than an AM antenna because the wavelengths are so much shorter, the antenna is a lot smaller. And so in AM band, you're probably looking at 500, 600, 700 feet of antenna, depending upon the frequency that you're at. FM, it's more like 5 feet. And the FM band is close to the traditional TV band, and you see people's TV antennas up on their towers So it's not a very big antenna. And my dad, being a ham radio operator, had a big tower in the backyard, and I put a proper antenna on it, fed it with coax, and now that's an actual antenna that probably really works. But then the question was where to broadcast, what frequency to broadcast on. And I actually wanted to do this legitimately. Now, I'm a young teenager. I was like 13 years old at the time, and I didn't have a big whopping bank account or anything. I hardly had any money at all. I was scraping together stuff. So I didn't have a team of lawyers. I wasn't really well prepared to go to the FCC and get a license, but if I could, I wanted to do it legally, or as legally as possible. And so through the connections my dad had, he knew some of the engineering people at the public radio station network. And a really good engineer, brilliant guy, a very great guy, gave me a hand. And he was involved in a lot of the provisioning of new radio stations for the public radio network. So he had gone through this process multiple times of getting FCC licenses for operations. And so he came over and we had a cup of coffee and talked about what I could do in order to get a properly licensed FM broadcast station going. And I think that the rules and regulations have evolved since those days. But he mentioned that there are provisions for low-powered FM, and it's possible. But it's not real easy. And one of the things you start with is a site survey, where you model out what your coverage area would be, and you try to find a spot in the radio FM band where you're not going to interfere with existing stations. The FCC had a bunch of rules and regulations regarding how close you can be to an existing or adjacent station. So if there's a station broadcasting on 95 FM, you can't put a station anywhere near that's broadcasting on that same channel. You'd interfere with them. Makes sense. And if you wanted to broadcast on 95.3 and they're at 95.1, well, there's a certain distance you have to be from that station so you don't interfere. And it has to do with distance and terrain and power levels and all of this stuff, of course. And so the further you are away in the band, the closer you could be physically to an adjacent station. So we scoured the FM band for openings that would be clear where you could legally drop in another FM station. Unfortunately, I was on the fringes of a major metropolitan area, and the band was pretty well occupied. There were a couple of spots in the band that you could operate in without interfering with anybody, but I couldn't make it work according to the FCC requirements. There was the best frequency that I found had an adjacent station to it that was 123 miles away. And the FCC requirement was 125 miles. I was just 2 miles too close. And seriously, in practical terms, nobody is going to be listening to a radio station in the FM band that's 123 miles away. So I think in practical terms, there's no way I'm going to interfere with that faraway station. But according to the FCC rules, I just wasn't quite there. Now, could I have assembled a team of lawyers and petitioned the FCC for a variance? Maybe. But because of that, I looked through all the rules and regulations, and I just couldn't quite make the rules in the location I was at. So close. And furthermore, hey, I was just a young teenager. I didn't have any real assets, and my pursuit of getting a legal license was, let's say, pretty theoretical. I mean, if I could have done it and afforded it, sure, but I went into that whole process kind of thinking there's no way. But hey, check. And the the engineer who helped me out was a great guy, and he spent plenty of time telling me the ins and outs of how to run a legal radio station and what I'd need to do and what I should be cautious of. And so I made every effort to be as legal as possible, with the exception of having a license, of course. And so I was very careful about running clean signal with commercial quality equipment. I cared about audio quality. I didn't have buzz or hum or anything like that. I made sure that my modulation levels were very well controlled so I didn't splatter and distort and interfere with anybody else in the band. I found an Orban audio processor that kept the modulation well under control and within legal standards. And so I ran a pretty good operation. And unfortunately, I couldn't figure out a way to do it legally, but I did tune the thing up on the very safest part of the band that I could to prevent interference with any existing stations. And we switched from the AM pirate station to the FM pirate station, and it was much better. So in my bedroom, I had a 6-foot equipment rack with this FM exciter in it, which was a piece of tube-type equipment from the 1960s, and it put off a good amount of heat, as I remember. And then I had some other tube-type equipment in there for audio processing and all kinds of stuff. It was quite a collection of gear, wires everywhere. I had a home-brewed audio mixer that was going into this that was actually a pretty good device, along with my little home stereo that I was spinning up albums on, and a open-reel tape deck so I could record an hour or more of music on a tape and kick that tape off and let it do the program for a while. So I got into this groove of after school, I'd come home, fire up the transmitter for the evening's broadcast, kick off the tape, and it was pretty automated situation, worked pretty well. And the FM station had a much, much better signal than the AM station. It was going into a proper antenna, put 10 or 15 or 20 watts into a good antenna up at 80 feet. And it was a Yankee antenna, so it was directional. So I could direct where I wanted the signal to go, which would be over the populated areas of the community, of course. And off of the back and the sides, I didn't have a whole lot of coverage, a couple of miles, few miles. But off of the frontal lobe of that antenna, I think I got 25 miles or so. I could cover the valley pretty decently. And I know a bunch of my friends at school would listen to the broadcast, and some of them would come over occasionally and participate. It was good times. And again, I wasn't really a whole lot into doing the, chill and groovy DJ thing, but we enjoyed playing music, and we played good music, and we didn't have any commercials. So we thought our station was probably better than the commercial stations in town. And so I did that for quite a while. And silly me, I'm spinning up the 5 artists that we play, and I'm on the radio saying, all right, everybody, well, there is another block of Rush for you. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll play some Kiss coming up next. And hey, if you got a request, phone it in. Here's my phone number. Feel free to request anything you like. We probably won't play it because we probably don't like it. And chances are it's not in my album collection, which isn't really very extensive anyway. But I'd love to hear your requests. So give us a call. And we'd get calls and play some of the stuff that people asked for if we had it. And one day, phone rings and I pick it up and, I'll change the names to protect the guilty, but guy calls me up and he's like, hey man, it's so cool what you're doing, man. This is Rockin' Rick. We really support all this stuff that's going down in your side of town, man. It's so cool. Hey, welcome to the airwaves, bro. What? I'm like, yeah, cool. Who's this? He's like, dude, don't you know? It's Rockin' Rick from 106. I'm like, what? Who's this guy? I really never paid that much attention to local radio. But he was the afternoon drive DJ on one of the biggest rock stations in town, the other side of the cities. And I was thinking, I don't know, those guys could pick up my signal from over here, but wow, okay, cool, I guess. So, yeah, wow, I guess we're getting famous now. I was a little trepidatious about that. I told my friends about it going, dude, the local afternoon drive DJ from the rock station called me up. And most of my friends thought, really, man, that's so cool. A couple of my more astute friends were like, that might not be good. I'm going, yeah, I'm not sure that's so good either. Didn't think that much about it, but yeah. So a couple weeks later, as usual, I come home from school and I walk in the room and turn on all the gear, get the tape playing, start doing the afternoon broadcast. And I head off to the shower to go wash myself off and take a nice shower. While I'm in the shower, my dad comes in, bangs on the door, and goes, "Hey, Barry, a couple guys here to see you." I'm like, "What? Who's here to see me?" He goes, "A couple guys out in the driveway, men in suits from the FCC." And I'm like, "Yeah, Dad, right. You're just pulling my leg." And he's like, "Nope." Oh, dear. So I get dressed, go out and meet these gentlemen. And they didn't come in a van loaded up with antennas or anything. Somebody told them about my situation, and I have a pretty good idea who that might be. They knew where they were going. They knew who they were looking for. And so they're saying, "It's our understanding that you're running an unlicensed radio operation here." Could be. It's like, well, let us inspect the facilities. So I bring them up to my room, and they're looking at all of this hardware. And there's two guys, kind of a lead guy and his sidekick. And the lead guy sort of pulls me aside and starts giving me a little bit of information about federal law, and that this is a crime that's punishable by 10 years in prison and $100,000, and that I really shouldn't be doing this. And meanwhile, his sidekick is going through all of my equipment with a fine-tooth comb, kind of seeing what I got running. And I know that they didn't do a signal analysis, and they didn't triangulate my position or anything like that, because his sidekick is poking through my rack, and he turns to his buddy and goes, "Hey, this kid's running stereo." And I'm like, "But of course." And the lead investigator explains the situation to me, that I've committed a crime, and he hands me his business card, and his initials were FM. And I was running a pirate FM station. I guess I was an impetuous kid. And as soon as I saw that his initials were FM, I don't know, somehow I just found that to be way too hilarious and had a hard time containing myself, going, "This is great." But it wasn't so great, because it's a federal crime. I could be in a whole heap of trouble. So the lead guy turns to me and says, "All right, kill the music, turn on the microphone, give me the mic." And he grabs the microphone and says, "Attention, this is the field agent, such and such, from the local Federal Communications Commission. We're hereby seizing control of this unlicensed broadcast facility. It's a pirate radio station. We're shutting it down." And he turns to me and is like, "Okay, kill it. Shut everything down." So I shut everything off. And they were actually pretty good guys. They They were serious. They didn't enjoy what I was doing, but they didn't give me too hard of a time. But just said, don't turn this back on again, and we'll be in touch. We're going to pass this investigation onto our enforcement people, and it'll go to the judge. See you in court. So I shut off the radio station at that point. I thought it would probably be wise to discontinue my broadcasting operations. And this made me recall some advice from my dad. Long before this incident, my dad pulled me aside and said, well, let me give you some advice. Advice from my dad, which would be my grandpa. He says, when I was a kid, I used to like to play down by the river. And my dad, your grandpa, pulled me aside one day and said, don't do that. Don't go playing down by the river. So, you know what I did? And I'm like, gee, Dad, I bet you went and played in the river. He goes, that's right. So what's the moral of the story? And I'm like, don't play in the river? He goes, no. The moral of the story is don't get caught. I'm like, okay, Dad. And he's like, listen, I know you're going to do all kinds of crazy stuff. So here's my advice. Don't be stupid. Don't hurt yourself. And don't tell me about it because I don't want to know. Don't get caught. Because if I find out about it, then it's going to be bad. And I don't want to know about it. So don't get caught. Okay. So officially, my dad didn't have any real knowledge of what I was up to. His attitude was that I'm a precocious, uncontrollable brat, and I'm all into all kinds of stuff. And me running a radio station, no surprise, but he had nothing to do with it, which is largely true. And he was concerned that some of his FCC licenses would be in jeopardy from my shenanigans. So he was probably more concerned than I was, but I was concerned about what the fallout of this would be, of course. I talked to the engineer who helped me with the band scan and the pursuit of getting a legal license and said, you've worked at the FCC a whole lot. What do you think about this situation? And his advice was, that's not good. Yeah, that's not good at all. They don't like that. But you're a young kid. You didn't cause any interference to any other existing stations. You did your best to operate, within the bounds, and didn't hurt anybody. And you're just a precocious young brat. So chances are they'll probably be fairly lenient with you, I hope. But they could really hurt you on this one. That's a serious federal crime. So good luck. But let me give you this advice. Why don't you write a letter to the judge? A letter saying that you're an idiot and you're not going to do it again, and you learned your lesson and you're really sorry. And maybe the judge will take some leniency on you and just give you a fine, if anything. So that's what I did. I wrote about a page and a half letter saying that I was an idiot and I shouldn't have done this. A while after that, I got a letter back saying that they'd considered my case and decided to not do anything bad to me at the moment. But if I do it again, they're going to be really nasty. So don't do it again. And I was very thankful that that's how it turned out. They could have fined me a whole lot of money. So it worked out pretty well in the end for me. But it's good times. I don't recommend doing it. It's not a very smart crime. If you're going to do a crime, you probably should do something that you're not so easily caught, because when you're broadcasting a signal, you're pretty easy to find. I think if the FCC wanted to find a rogue signal, they're well equipped to do that and chase you down pretty easily. And broadcasting is really putting yourself out there. I mean, It's not very stealthy at all. So not a good idea. I do not recommend it. So learn from my mistakes and don't do them yourselves. What happened to the equipment? I don't really know. I shut it down at that point, and I had a 6-foot rack full of an Orban processor and this exciter and a bunch of other stuff, which I had no use for after I was not broadcasting anymore. And so I think I gave it to my dad, and he brought it to his company where they had a basement full of miscellaneous old electronic hardware that was just being stored in the archives. And so I suspect it just gathered a lot of dust in the basement and was probably discarded years later, but I don't know what became of the equipment. But since then, I moved on to audio, which was more interesting to me and a whole lot more legal. So that's my story of being a radio pirate back in the late 70s. Good times. And maybe some lessons learned, maybe not. Don't tussle with the Federal Communications Commission or other federal agencies. They could really give you a bad day. So that's my story of piracy on the AM and FM bands when I was a kid. Good times, crazy times, but not very smart times. But I hope you enjoyed the tale. And if you did, give it a thumbs up. If you want to contribute to my future bail fund, super thanks is down below. It's always appreciated. If you enjoy the channel, please consider subscribing. I appreciate your support. And watching more videos. That's always awesome. So hopefully I'll catch you on another upcoming episode. Take care.